Hello, everyone. I hope that you are well. The chapter that we will be looking at today is chapter 9, which looks at physical and cognitive development. In middle childhood. And middle childhood is considered the time period which ranges from around 6 years to something like 12 years. Now, when we talk about physical development, right, one of the first things that we look at is how is the body growing? And what we see is that, similar to what we had in early childhood, the body is growing at a steady, slower pace than what it was when we see, the growth rate which we had during infancy, right? So usually what you see is that children are growing something like 2 to 3 inches per year, and they're adding around at an average of 5 pounds per year, right? Sorry. What you see when you look at certain gender differences is that if you consider the ages around 6 to 8, boys again tend to be larger than girls, but by age 9, right, the sex differences become reversed, right? So the sex difference trend is reversed. And what happens is that girls start to catch up with boys in terms of physical size, and then they even become taller than boys as they grow older, because what happens is that, the growth spurt that girls experience right around puberty, right, is a few years earlier in girls than in boys. And therefore, what you see is that they tend to become taller really all of a sudden. So let's look at certain pictures of children here in your book, and it sort of outlines what growth looks like. One of the things that you see is, so for example, when we're looking at sex differences, so if we look here, we see Andy at 6 years, and we see Amy at 6 years. This is Amy here. Now at 6 years, they look pretty much the same if you talk about height, but then what you see is that by 9 years, or if you look at 10.5 years, Amy looks, considerably more mature than Andy, who's at the same age. So yes, there are sex differences in the sense that, the sort of differences that emerge because of sex are changing. In the sense that girls are growing up faster than boys during this time. Another thing that you might notice is that the legs seem to be the largest part. They seem to be very, very long. And this is why during middle childhood, what happens is that children tend to grow out of their jeans, right, a lot quicker than they grow out of jackets. The reason for that is, so they grow out of jeans a lot quicker than jackets. And the reason for that is that the legs are really the part of your body that are growing at the fastest rate, right? So children during middle childhood tend to require a lot more new jeans and shoes than they require new shirts and jackets. So that's another thing that's happening, in the sense that, when you talk about body proportion, what you see is that the lower limbs are developing faster than the upper body. The thing that you see is that, bones are becoming broader and longer, right? So there's the change in bones, and because of this, children experience a lot of growing pains during nighttime, especially. And coupled with this, muscles are also becoming stronger. And what is happening with this is that as bones are becoming broader and longer, right, you still have this sort of exception that with children this young, the ligaments are still not attached to the bones. And therefore, that is basically what gives children who are in this age range, a lot of flexibility. So if you've seen children this age, you might have marveled at how they're able to very easily, turn cartwheels, or for example, you do this sort of exercise in which you become a bridge. So usually children this young are able to master all of such tasks very, very easily because their bones are becoming longer, broader, stronger. The muscles are also becoming stronger, and the ligaments are not yet attached to the bones, which allows for a lot of flexibility, right? There are differences in terms of muscle fat makeup as well. So again, the gender difference here, the sex difference here, it sort of persists. Girls tend to they tend to have a greater fat to muscle ratio in the sense that they have more fat than they have muscle. For boys, it's the opposite. This is a gender difference that increases in adolescence. So as girls become adolescents or teenagers, they will begin to accumulate even more fat, right? So this is something that will increase. Also, between 6 to 12 years, all of children's teeth are lost and are replaced by more permanent teeth, right? And girls tend to lose their teeth slightly earlier than boys. One of the things that you might have noticed with children so young is that, when they get their permanent teeth, these permanent teeth may look too large for their face, but then as the, facial structure is also changing, in a few years, they start to look more normal. Next, what we come to is looking at some of the health problems that children in middle childhood face. Now, what we saw earlier was that with children who are younger, the immune system is not very well developed. But here, because children are, eating a lot more in the sense that they are more open to greater variety of food. So because of, nutrition and because of, a greater, a stronger immune system. Sorry about this. A stronger immune system. What you see is that children at this age, they tend to be their healthiest. So they get sick a lot less often than children who are younger. They are less prone to ear infections, and that is because the anatomy of the ear has also changed since they were children, right? So, and one of the biggest risks to their health, despite all of this, is what we call myopia, or which is basically nearsightedness. And the reasons for myopia, some researchers believe that they range as far as, some sort of trauma during birth. But there are other causes as well. So if, for example, children, read a lot of books in dim light, or they use a lot of, they spend a lot of time on the screen, right? So that can also, these factors also contribute to the development of myopia. And that's why it's important for children to take care of their eyes and to be careful, even though myopia can be corrected by, corrective lenses, and it's not very problematic. But still, so this is one of the biggest issues that we see coming forth in middle childhood. The other issue that we mostly see is that of asthma, in which what happens is that the bronchial tubes, which are basically the tubes that connect the lungs with the throat, and what happens is that these passages become extremely sensitive and they fill up with mucus. And usually this is because there is some sort of irritant present, such as pollution, or for example, sometimes this can also happen as a result of cold weather. And what happens is that when a child does develop asthma, they have a lot of coughing, wheezing, they could have difficulty breathing as well, right? So a number of different symptoms and a number of different causes. So what you see is that children who live in lower SES neighborhoods usually tend to have a greater incidence of asthma. Now, reasons for that could be that, because their environment is polluted. So that could also be a factor in them developing the condition in the first place. We see the same kind of trend even in different, you know, um, other sort of areas which pose a significant risk to health, such as malnutrition, right? So children who do not have proper access to healthy food, right? Or who do not have access to medical care, right, are also at greater risk for developing illness. When we talk about malnutrition, so one case is in which there is not enough food. There is another case in which what's happening is that because children in middle childhood, they have such a busy life all of a sudden because they have all these new friends, they have a very busy schedule because of all the sort of activities, all the sort of play that they're engaging in. So the other sort of condition is when children are not eating enough or they're not eating right. Right, so usually not eating enough in itself is not going to cause malnutrition, right? Because mostly if you skip out eating or you skip out eating on a meal, chances are that the child is going to make up for it in the next meal. But if not enough eating is something that is persisting from earlier childhood, then it could be problematic, and that is when it could lead towards malnutrition. Not eating right, now that's another thing. So, usually, what you find is that children who eat with their parents, especially dinner, tend to eat a lot more fruits and vegetables than fried foods. And fruits and vegetables obviously have better nutritional content than something like chips and nuggets. So yes, another thing that related to food, when we're talking about food here, is that of obesity, and this is another problem that we see in children. And there might be several factors for it, such as genetic factors. So usually twins, teens, sometimes identical twins. Usually, if you look at them, there are greater chances of both of them being obese than only one. Then, even with parents, what you see is that if the parents are obese, then there's greater chances of the children also being obese. So, there are genetic factors at play, but then other researchers argue that genetic factors only provide a predisposition to gain weight, right? So it's always genetics with the sort of environment that you have in terms of your eating habits, right? And this again, we can apply the same sort of formula to it, that if children eat with parents, if they have dinner with parents, and obviously if parents also eat healthy, then children are also bound to eat healthier, right? So eating patterns of parents are also important. Then, the environment, when we look at the environment, when we consider the environment, something like socioeconomic level is also something that needs to be taken into consideration, because one of the things that you do see when you look at, for example, statistics from the United States is that children from lower SES backgrounds tend to eat a diet that is higher in sugar, and because of that, they tend to gain weight, and they tend to be much more obese than children who are from socioeconomic higher socioeconomic levels, right? So SES then is also a very important factor when we consider obesity. Then obviously, tied to SES is the kind of neighborhood that you have, the opportunities for exercise that you have. So if your neighborhood is not very safe, it's not equipped with a park or a gym, then you're much less likely to exercise. And obviously, exercise is also related to greater health. So then, you are more likely to be obese, right? Because these are all the factors that sort of make up your environment. So, it's always, whenever you consider something like obesity, you have to consider, genetic material is there, but then how is the environment also contributing towards making this person eat the way that they're eating, right? So that is something that you always need to consider as well. Anyway, we move on. We talk about how motor development is changing during this period. Now, when we talk about motor development, we also consider the sort of play that children in middle childhood are engaging in. And when we consider motor development, one area that we look at is that of gross motor development. And what we see is that when we compare this to early childhood, children at this age are able to, their skills at jumping, for example, or running or riding a cycle, they're all getting more refined, right? So gross motor development or gross motor skills are something that are becoming much more refined during these ages, right? They're becoming more defined because certain aspects of gross motor development are changing or improving, right? The first of these is balance. So, what is happening during middle childhood is that children are able to balance a lot better. Obviously, if they're able to balance, that means that they're able to, you know, perform a wide variety of different tasks better, such as that of running, or something like hopping, kicking a ball, right? So if you have improved balance, you can do all of these things much better, right? Then there is flexibility, and we talked about this earlier as well when we were considering how bones are becoming broader and muscles are getting stronger, but ligaments are not yet attached to bones, so that allows for greater flexibility, right? And greater flexibility obviously allows you to perform many sort of gross motor skills in a more refined manner, such as move your whole body in order to swing a bat, right? That basically requires flexibility, right? Or for you to able to be to kick a ball, right? Or to do cartwheels. All of those are better improved when you have greater flexibility. Then there is also agility. Now, what exactly does agility mean? Someone who's very agile is someone who has these very quick movements, right? So if you have quick movements, then obviously you're able to perform a wide variety of tasks better, in the sense that you're able to dance better because you are able to quickly master these steps of movement, or these series of movements, really, right? You're able to, let's suppose, if you're playing football, you're able to dodge an opponent better, right? So all this has to do with agility. Now, the fourth factor that we consider is that of force. Now, what is happening is that as muscles are getting stronger, and as we talked about this earlier as well, that bones are also becoming broader, children are also acquiring much more force than they had previously, right? Which means that they're able to kick a ball further than they were able to when they were younger. They're able to bat a lot more strongly, right? They're able to propel themselves forward while running or jumping much more strongly, right? So the force with which they performed any of the skills that they were previously performing, because the force has increased, so they're able to perform all of these different actions in a better fashion as well, right? So these are certain areas regarding gross motor development that are improving as children enter middle childhood. Now, these are some physical factors, but when we talk about games and we talk about all of these different sort of activities that we've talked about, which are something like batting a ball or swinging a bat to hit a ball, right? Batting, or playing football, so kicking or dodging or dancing, all of these require information processing skills as well. So, this goes hand in hand, the physical development goes hand in hand with the cognitive development, because you need to be able to process information faster. Your reaction time also needs to be, faster in order for you to react quickly, in the sense that, if you see a ball approaching you, right, and you need to swing your bat in order to hit it, then your reaction time needs to be appropriate, right? You need to process that information, which is, there's parallel processing taking place, in the sense that your brain is taking in information about the position of the ball, about its speed, about what sort of direction it's coming from, right? About where you want to hit it, at what angle do you want to get this ball. So it's a lot of information processing at play as well, which is influencing how well you're able to perform any of these activities. So even with something like kicking, right? Something like dodging, because you're trying to make a lot of decisions in terms of where should I turn, how should I tackle this particular opponent? How should I try to, make this pass so that they're not able to get the ball from me, right? Even with dancing, right? So all of these different activities require your reaction time to be faster. And obviously, reaction time does depend on your information processing skills and how much information you're able to hold in working memory. So that obviously does play a part as well. What you see is that reaction time usually increases steadily um, from 5 years to 11 years. At 11 years, you have a huge gain in reaction time. And therefore, what you see is that, usually if you bat a ball to 6 to 7 year old children, right, they're almost never able to get it. But as children become older, they are able to hit a ball that, you hit out to them, right? So that is why, certain sports are appropriate to introduce at particular ages. So, for example, something like tennis may not be appropriate till a child is around 7 years of age, 11 years of age, sorry. Or, you should perhaps have some other kind of sport which does not require the same kind of aim and the same kind of information processing that is involved with tennis. So, simpler sports are to follow the more complicated or complex sports. So this is basically it about gross motor skills. Next, what we talk about is fine motor skills. And whenever we consider fine motor skills, we consider two different areas that we look at. So the first of these is handwriting, and the second of these is drawing. Handwriting, or what we call printing, really. And the second is that of drawing. And what we see is that, children who are around 6 years of age, right, their handwriting is very large. They're able to write capital letters better, right? Because, capital letters are usually easier to write because, small letters, what you see is that, for example, if write out a capital A, that is simpler motions than this A, right? The small case A. Because what is happening at around 6 years of age is that children, when they're printing, they're still writing, they're still using the whole arm instead of just the wrist, right? And therefore they're making these, broad strokes. And because of this, this is much easier to write for them than this. Another thing is that their handwriting is getting more legible in the sense that they are able to communicate what they're writing. You're able to read it. And mostly what you see is that by age 6, so by 6 years of age, children are able to write the alphabet. They're able to write their name, for example, right? So writing, legibility is something that's improving with age. But by 6 years, there is some groundwork that's already been laid, and they are able to, write out their name, write out the alphabet, write out their numbers from 1 to 10. So, there is improvement in how their fine motor skills are developing as regards printing. When we talk about drawing, what you see is that in drawing, there is more, sort of inculcation of depth, right? And children are drawing more complex drawings. Let me show you an example of this. And what's happening here, when you look at this picture, so here this is by a 6-year-old, right, who's showing her family. So what's important to note here is that, you can see that the artist here has drawn all of these pictures in relation to one another. So, the mother is shorter than the father. Then you have the sister who's the eldest amongst the siblings, but she's still, obviously smaller than the parents. So the height is, relative to each other. Then you also have, relative size in terms of, even though the father is the tallest, he's still smaller than, the height of the house. So that's something important to consider. Then the human, all of them, the figures, they're more complex than what they used to be. When children are younger, all of them are wearing different clothes. There's more detail to all of them. However, if you compare this picture to this one, you see a lot more integration of depth cues. So when you focus on this picture, which is drawn out by a 10-year-old, what you see is that there's a lot more integration in the sense that, you see that what is far, all of these buildings that are further from where this picture is being drawn, or the perspective that's been given, they're much smaller in size than the fishermen here, right? And you have other sort of depth cues present here as well, such as that of interposition, in which there are some people who are those who are closer, right? They are interposed in such a way that you can see they're positioned in such a way that you can sort of make out that their figure is closer than the figure that they are in front of. So yeah, so there's integration. The integration of depth cues really increases. Detail also is increasing in terms of how much detail you're putting into your pictures. So yeah, so drawing is also seeing all of these different milestones.